So after we acquired exiting out the farmer project, I managed to get the company shut down and move on, and the clients were happy. Then from that point onwards, a lot of receivers I was making contact or already had sort of relationships with them post the crash actually of 2008, 2009. And because in that time I was still actually buying quite a few opportunities of receivers, whereas, for example, large houses that you couldn't get. I think you have to remember at that time, receivers maybe, I'm trying to think of a better word, is for want of a better word, maybe were not as interested, or some of them, in terms of actual full marketing process, and although they were interested in realising the best values for their clients, who were the lenders that actually bought these properties, but they were just keen just to get it off the books, because it was just incurring them more and more charges and fees as things went along. So we managed to acquire quite a few assets, ranging from large houses that was converted into, I think, 12 apartments, 14 apartments in well-arranged Manchester, ranging from partially built developments in Kirkham, which was, I think, 12 offices, or maybe 8 offices at the time, whereas it was about 80% complete. We managed to buy it off the receivers, and then go in and finish off the 20% remaining works and bring it up to building regs, fire regs. At that time, the fire regs wasn't as strict then. And then what we did is appointed a local agent and just marketed each of the units to be sold. We eventually sold them all, I think, within 12 to 18 months. And it was a good profit for the investors that was involved for that. And then some of the properties that I remember that buying is a warehouse in Stockport. I think it was 5 large units of 25,000 square foot each. And I remember the receivers rang me a couple of times and they offered this property, and nobody was really interested, and nobody really had the money or the will to buy this type of thing. And I went to have a look at it, and I thought it's not a bad opportunity, this, because at the time I think it was about maybe £400,000 just for roughly 150,000 square foot of industrial spaces. There was one tenant in one of the units, and it worked out a fantastic deal for the investors that I brought in, because as soon as we bought it, we managed to renegotiate with the tenant to reduce to a smaller unit and actually create something like I think it was 10 or 12 smaller units out the rest of the space, in terms of just putting partition walls and separate entrances for every single unit. It was a large sort of rectangular plot, so you was able to make say 5 entrances on one side, 5 entrances on one side, and then there was a building at the back, which is the 25,000 square feet tenant sort of kept for themselves. That property actually turned around within maybe 9 months, because it was only 6 months worth of works that was being done to it, and from next to nothing in terms of rental income, it came to about 15 or 16% net yield after purchase. But we'd increased the value by at least, I think, 1.4 million within month 18, and it was a fantastic turnaround, that project. It was an industrial estate that was tucked at the back of residential sort of houses. So that was another great one. Then at the time there were US private equity funds as well. They had huge amounts of portfolios that they bought, and we managed to acquire a few of them portfolios in terms of nationwide portfolios with some investors. Again, they were one particular example. I remember we bought, I think it was 12 or 13 units. My memory's getting really bad these days, but 12 or 13 units, and the receiver called me, and they were having issues with one buyer who had agreed to actually buy them, and would we have interest in actually buying this, but only on the basis that we can do this deal quick. So I went to have a look at them, and I looked at the numbers, and I think it was about 18% net yield or 17% from day one. There were low sort of capital values per square foot, so it was just a case of there was quite a few tenants that were holding over. I think one or two out of them was empty, and it just needed a lot of tidying up. Service charges were not being paid on some of the units that were in the middle of industrial parks. We went in and bought it, but actually the investors that I worked with on the day was a local UK family, and from the moment I introduced the property to him, credit to him, he actually put the money into the solicitor's account on the same day that I took it to him. And so, which give me the resources to go to the receiver to say, here's proof of funds from the solicitor. The money's actually ready on account to do this deal today, the price that you wanted. So I'll leave it to you. And the receivers came back to me first thing in the morning and said, we're pulling the contract from this buyer. Can you go ahead and do this deal? So we said, yes, fine. And the deal didn't complete straight away because there were a lot of question marks in terms of unanswered questions which the receivers did not have much knowledge of. But we actually managed to visit all them sites. I think it was 2 or 3 of us that was working on it. So there was one person that came from the buyer side, and we looked at all the sites, managed to understand all the pros and cons and the drawbacks and potentials that we can do. But in essence, once we bought that site, it took about 2 or 3 months actually to complete on it all. I think we had to buy 12 in the end, and then the last one was not able to be bought until the title issue was resolved, which was 3 or 4 months later. That turned out really good because it went from 18% net yield to 30% net yield within the space of, I think, 12 to 18 months. Regeared a lot of the leases, managed to get the empty ones rented, and I remember going back to the investors, said, would you consider selling this after, I think, the 18 months once it was done? And they just gave me a blank stare and said, absolutely no interest in selling because they were making that much of a profit on it anyway, and the property was going to be more or less paid for within 4 or 5 years. So yeah, and that's what led on to from that section. But then the next chapter really is from that point onwards,